It's 5 to 7. He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb.
Well, good evening. This is Islands at War with me, Keith Vingeli, and of course,
Nick Lahire. Morning, Keith.
Morning, Nick. Now, 1944, January 1944. We have, as we know, a whole year of war still, an occupation ahead of us. But there is a great feeling amongst many people, both here on the islands and islanders in the UK, that 1944 might see victory. You've come up with a fascinating page from the Channel Island Review. So what's your take on how people are viewing 1944?
Well, let's see. I mean, in the UK, this is a fairly bold front page of the Channel Island Review.
Very, very positive.
Very, very positive. January 1944, in this year of victory. And as we enter into the year that we confidently expect to be the year of our victory.
Very assertive.
Yeah, and it's almost a whole front page of the review saying that. Yeah, and so people are thinking that this must be it. And I'm sure not just for the Channel Islands, but everybody is thinking that this must be it. It's got to be the final year. You really hope so, wouldn't you? And likewise, in Guernsey, you look at all the diaries and people are perhaps not so buoyant, but there's a mix of kind of...
We can't suffer any more than we're currently suffering. Little did they know.
Resigned to what's happening to them at the moment, but equally hoping that this is going to be the final year.
And people here would be aware, even with the sort of news restraints, that the Germans were now on the back foot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So that feeds in, even if it's subliminally, into this general feeling. They're seeing United States aircraft, which we'll touch on later. And so there's a feeling that you're sort of on the
particularly in January, there's a lot of talk in the diaries about bombing. A lot of people that I've spoken to over the years talk about they've been seeing more activity going on. And we can verify that from looking at the archives. So, yeah, it had all ramped up because it was the run-up to D-Day.
Yeah, yeah. And the feeling is universal across the island. And do we know really what the Germans were... I know there was a lot of hope amongst the Germans that it would all be wound up because a lot of them have seen the devastation on the continent and especially in Germany. But do you think that there was an actual feeling that 1944 would see the end of the war one way or another?
Certainly some of them felt that way. Some of them were realistic and realised this had been over for at least a year, maybe 2 years.
But the secret weapons are now being spoken about as well.
I know, but the more realistic, the ones that were, particularly the soldiers that were of the officer class from a traditional military background.
Yeah, not wedded to Nazi ideology.
Yeah, exactly. Who they couldn't, in most cases, say it, but they knew it. And frankly, if they were sat here, they were quite happy because they're not on the Eastern Front. They're not getting a very short lifespan once they got there. Even if you were an officer, they're quite happy sat here, counterbalanced by the fact they're not doing so well on the food front, which comes to another bit from the Channel Island Monthly Review, because you'll remember, if you've listened to the last episode, we talked about this article, How Guernsey is Faring, which appeared in the Channel Island Monthly Review in their December issue, and the information had been obtained from various sources, being escapees, commando raids, that sort of thing.
Yes, we should perhaps just explain to people that may be new to the podcast. The Channel Island Monthly Review was a periodical that was published and made available to Channel Islanders that had evacuated and service personnel that evacuated to the United Kingdom.
Oh, yeah, these found their way all around the world because people posted them to the family members who were serving all around the world.
Yeah, but what stands out to me is there's a detailed analysis of 1943 tomato crop exports.
Yeah, because the Germans were exporting them. We talked about that in previous episodes. The island is starving, but the Germans were requisitioning tomatoes and exporting them. Hey-ho. Then they've reprinted some of the articles in prohibition orders regarding bartering, etc. But I do find that we'll come to something in a minute which I find very puzzling. But then there's other things to show how people are keeping their spirits up in the Channel Islands. There's a tiny article called On the Jersey Stage, which talks about Jersey green room gossip, which is about to be published monthly in Jersey, and that's reached this country again from Germany in this case. This one's somehow found its way to Germany.
So this would have gone from Jersey to Jersey people that were being detained in Germany, and they then have sent that on through the Red Cross to their relatives in the UK.
Yeah, because they could write longer letters going from here to Germany. They weren't constrained by the 20, 25 words thing to Germany, because the Germans hadn't worked out that, that information then gets sent on, because the people in the camps in Germany could then write to people in the UK
and send them things
as well. Which is the only way I can see how something else we're going to talk about in a few minutes actually happened. But they've got a whole review of what's been going on the Jersey stage, which is quite interesting.
So this is a sort of theatrical gossip periodical that they're looking at going monthly.
They're talking about what's been on The Merchant of Venice. That was on when I was at school. We had to do that. Outward Bound at the Central Hall in Guernsey. There's all sorts listed there. The bottom of the page has got a rather curious article about a new record price being set for a Guernsey cow in the UK. That's one of the things that is a major bugbear. If you go into the British Newspaper Archives database and search Guernsey, you will find thousands and thousands and thousands of adverts or reports on sales of Guernsey cattle.
In the UK?
In the UK.
Yeah. And this is for dairy use or beef? That would be predominantly, I suppose, both markets, really.
Both markets, probably, but it's just the reports on sales, adverts for auctions, etc. It just shows how important Guernsey cows were and still are viewed around the world. Then the other thing that I found in the monthly review, which I thought was potentially of interest to people, was that our friends in SONC might feel they've been a bit left out. We've talked about various things there, but not particularly often. But in the monthly review, there's an article about a small colony of SONC people in Germany. Well, it would have been very small, because I think that there were only about 6 or 7 that were deported, maybe slightly more than that, but not very many.
Yes, and so some of this here is relaying news to people back in the UK from Germany, I guess, talking about the vicarages in a very bad way, the church needing great attention. So it's a sort of roundup of bits and pieces there from Sark, and a little bit there from Alderney that had lost, keeping Alderney people in the loop. And of course, nobody from Alderney would have been deported because they'd all evacuated.
Bar the handful of people that were there,
yeah,
that were stayed behind.
But there'd have been no Alderney people in Biberach or Laufen, the main detention camps, because just remind people, of course, the population of Alderney effectively, apart from less than 1%, had evacuated in 1940. Now, Reverend Ord, we go to the diaries now. One of the things I just wanted to mention is that regular listeners know that we've extracted and analysed data from a lot of diaries right from the start of the occupation. But what Nick and I have found recently is, apart from diaries from Ord and Louis Guillemette, and soon von Alphus, the German diary, will come on stream. Many of the other diarists, their entries are starting to peter out a bit. The entries themselves have a lot less to say. Weeks and sometimes months goes by without an entry, and it's almost as if this war fatigue is affecting their, not ability so much, Nick, but more their impetus to keep these diary entries going.
Yeah, there's a couple of things around this. There's the fact that they're very cold, they're not getting enough to eat, so they're very tired and frankly exhausted. They've got no lighting in the evenings for most of the time, and they're also running out of typewriter ribbons and anything to type it on.
And I think they, with the greatest respect, they might even be boring themselves, because it's a litany of what we haven't got.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there are 1 or 2 of them who wrote their diaries with a view to the fact that if they didn't survive the occupation,
Well, that's cool. That's a really good point.
It would be a record for their family about what happened. And you've got to wonder by this stage that there's so many deaths reported in the diaries that are people thinking, well, I've been writing about this for 3.5 years, and frankly, they might be bored of it. I wonder if they'll get this far with reading it. But also the fact that they're potentially going to die sometime.
Yes, that's right. And they were reduced to a pretty mundane existence, whereas people like Ord was getting out and about amongst the community and meeting, how we described, his German confidants. Plus, Louis is in the machinery of government.
Ambrose Robin is also going to church to hear Ord's services.
Yes,
So, they do cross over from that point of view as well. And we're very lucky that Ambrose Robin typed his diary. I'm guessing that he probably did that at work, potentially.
Yeah.
Some of the other ones I've seen are typewritten, but most of them are handwritten, or they switch between the two.
Okay, so with that in mind, we do have our regular diarists that kept really substantial diaries, and we go now to Reverend Ord. And now this is to do with Russian prisoners. Ord writes of Russian prisoners present at his church services. Now, Ord, just to remind you, was a Methodist preacher, a Methodist church cleric, and he makes a point of saying that the Russians knew no English but seemed to enjoy the music and the singing. And I think Ord, reading between the lines here, he was able, from his time in captivity in the First World War, to pick up a little bit of the Russian language, and he was able to say a few words to these poor unfortunates. Now, the thing is, Nick, the question I put to you, were they slaves or were they organisation towed? They were forced. It's a really difficult one. They worked for organisation Todd, but they weren't your slave labourers. These were basically people who were mostly prisoners of war that had been captured just from somewhere that had been overrun and were given the choice of do this or... Yes, because they'd effectively joined an organisation where they would be paid, but they weren't slaves. And listeners should be aware that there was no Red Cross agreement between Germany and Russia, and so the treatment of each other's prisoners was pretty awful. But these guys were, to a degree, protected because they were an organisation towed, which possibly means that they may have been Ukrainians and Georgians, or
quite possibly.
Yeah,
the Russians just gets used because
it's an all-embracing term.
Most of the people at the time wouldn't have known the difference between anyway. But as you say, Ord had been a prisoner of war in the First World War. He'd learnt a bit of Russian. This is one of the great things about Ord's diary. Ord speaks German fluently.
Yeah.
Ord speaks French. Ord speaks a little bit of Russian, and he's got a smattering of other things in there from what I can gather. So he can earwig. He does what I'm so and so for doing this when I'm in France. When people look at, you sat in a cafe and people think, oh, it's an English person over there. That's fine. They're chatting about things. I love sitting there earwigging.
Because they don't know that you can understand them.
Yeah, exactly. They just assume I can only order coffee or whatever. And I love doing that. And then have a few words with them afterwards.
Just,
on the way out, just to give them the hint that I actually knew exactly what they were saying.
Well, Ord talks to the Russians. It says he added a few words to the Russians. Their faces lit up at once in delight, and afterwards we had a pleasant talk. And of course, these things did mean a whole amount to these poor people.
Yeah. I mean, a small bit of comfort. And Ord says they sang along even though they didn't know the words. But I'm guessing they just picked it up because they went along from the congregation.
Okay, Ord also talks about, there's a place in the middle, sort of pretty much in the middle of the Guernsey, it's in the countryside, a place called Talbot Valley. The Germans were very enthusiastic tunnellers and tunnelled everywhere. Ord notices that work had been suspended. Now, Nick, in Talbot Valley, because it's in Guernsey, it's a relatively big valley. Where might these tunnels be, and was anything ever completed?
it's not the place I'd have picked to go tunnelling, to be fair. And as you say, they were very keen tunnellers in Guernsey, so much so that Festing actually have an entire book just dealing with tunnels. They only substantially began one tunnel, which was a munitions store in 1942, and they had another one as well. But they were starting to construct, in theory, 4 tunnels. It's very odd. One of them's really sort of a quarry. So if you drive down the Talbot Valley, it's on the right-hand side. You'll see this concrete arch with some doors on it. Most people probably drive past it, don't realise quite what it is. But the rock there was not really particularly good. So I'm not really quite sure why they were tunnelling there, because a lot of the rock there they found would basically crumble in your hand.
Yeah. I think it was limestone. I think this is what that possibly would.
No, I think it was something else. I don't think we have limestone as such in Guernsey, which was something that came up yesterday, actually, in the random discussions that I have, that some of the steps in Castle Corner are apparently limestone, which is not generally found in the Channel Islands, apparently. I'm not an expert on rocks.
We're not geologists.
I'm not an expert on rocks or anything like that, but that's what I was told yesterday, which shows that must have been imported. Anyway, back to our tunnels. They've got a west entrance in Les Gallions, which apparently is not a true tunnel, but it was built initially to allow them to reach some sound rock to start their tunneling in. So it's kind of a sort of a bit of quarried out bit. But again, they gave up there because it was falling apart. It was bricked up and used partly as an ammunition store. Then they had another lower tunnel, which had a steep ramp dug in front of the concrete entrance, and trucks were cut up and pushed in there as scrap. Now, of course, an awful lot of stuff was found in tunnels after the occupation. We should mention that for those that aren't aware of this, people aren't from the Channel Islands. That's where an awful lot of stuff that ended up in museums here or in personal collections.
Yeah, it was just dumped in it.
It was dumped in tunnels. They were bricked up, and over the 50s and 60s, people went and took stuff out of them. Oh, well, some of it fell prey to the scrap drive, and there's still the odd tunnel and things in, but it's not things that you'd want to be moving, and they are bricked up. So there are some tunnels on private land. There's a couple of tunnels in Sunk. I think we mentioned those before, potentially with Tim Osborne, who I also ran into yesterday. A quick chat with him. But one of the tunnels has been repurposed in Sunk, and it's the wine cellar for Stocks Hotel.
Oh, right.
It's
Okay.
lovely. It's lovely. Yeah. It's got, apart from that, it's got lots of wine in it.
Yeah.
You know, it's got light, it's dry, and that's where they store their wine. It's just.
I don't think I've been in there. I suppose one can just politely ask and make an appointment.
Probably, I've been in it a few times, but when we've been doing organised tours over there, they because again, a bit like bunkers, the temperature doesn't really change.
Yes,
no matter what the temperature outside is. So it's perfect for storing things like wine or growing mushrooms, as we also know. Anyway, back to the Talbot Valley. They dug out quite a bit of rock, and they had some associated structures around there. I think likely a stone crusher and a concrete mixing area as well. And they possibly had just some generators as well, because some foundations have been found there which look like that was what they were being used for.
Yeah, we see my father would allude to these tunnels as far as he was concerned. They were going to be gas chambers, and the civilian population were all going to be herded into them. But you can understand why the darkest thoughts came to people's minds.
And of course, not only did they create these tunnels, but they also changed the landscape around them.
With the backfill.
With the backfill, bit like the underground hospital, where they basically filled in a valley,
a whole valley. Yeah,
just taking the stuff across the road and dumping it in. You know, they also, if you look at Talbot Valley where these are, they did the similar sort of thing. They didn't fill in the whole valley because they didn't tunnel that much, but they dammed streams and they altered the water course. I mean, it's very wet down there anyway.
Yeah.
in that valley. So,
well, that's what valleys collect water, don't they?
Yeah,
the water runs down the side.
But it does get very, very, very wet down there, and the roads quite often got water flowing down it, even if there's been relatively light rainfall. So it's not going to be a perfect place for building your tunnel.
No. Okay, so, right, Ord is a witness in a court case, and we go back to September 1943. If I remember correctly, he was in conversation, Nick, a gentleman was in conversation with Ord and was struck by a drunk Luftwaffe mechanic driving, was it a motorbike?
No, it was on a bicycle. Came down the Val.
That's right, yeah.
Came down the Val de Terres, for those of Guernsey, and Ord was stood with his wife chatting to another chap and his wife. The name escapes me for this second, but I'll think about it. I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah, and that was September. This is January 44, and it's taken this long for it to get to German court-martial. And curiously, they'd had to bring him back from France. So there'd obviously been no repercussions initially. So the Ord's description of it is quite interesting. The German court-martial was able to sit this morning as they'd got the accused over from France at last. So clearly everybody was a bit miffed about this, as you would be, because this chap who'd been killed was very well liked. Ord talks about the president of the court-martial being an officer of the Luftwaffe and 4 others. They filed in and gave a Nazi stretch, whatever that might be. I'm guessing that might be the salute. That's how. And he said the 4 witnesses were excluded from proceedings and then summoned Seriteum for he talks about it as interrogation, with himself going first. So obviously to give evidence, perhaps not quite the way people give evidence in court these days. He had a very efficient interpreter, which the Germans were somewhat surprised a little bit later on in proceedings. When they were talking about him and the interpreter was not interpreting, the Ord answered them back, basically.
Yes, he hadn't disclosed the fact he understood what the court proceedings were in German were actually saying. And didn't the judge sort of lift his head up and say something, you understand this?
Yeah, what happened was Ord interposed it at one point because the interpreter had interpreted what he'd said inaccurately. So Ord said, no, that wasn't what I said, basically. And the judge looked up very sharply as soon as he said that and said, do you understand what is being said? Yeah. Once they'd given evidence, they were allowed to remain until the end. But I love this description of the lawyer that's representing this chap. He was a proper punch cartoon German with rolls of fat on the back of his neck. And this is the lawyer that's prosecuting. And when he made out his case against the prisoner, he spoke alternately in growling or in hectoring tones, suggesting 5 months imprisonment. But then the judge casually lights up a cigarette while they're trying to make them look what it's all very strange.
So what comes about for me is this chap, suddenly loses his life in quite a violent manner, to be sort of run down like that. And Ord says, in giving my evidence, I concluded by saying that we, none of us, least of all the friend that we had lost, harboured bitterness. I mean, that's quite a thing to say.
Yeah, I mean, bearing in mind this is 4 months on from the event, Ord also notes that the prisoner is still showing signs of his injuries from hitting the wall at Havelock. Yeah, that's quite something. But while they've gone off to determine his fate, the guy actually breaks down in court and wept, pleading for mitigation for the sentence when it was given, saying it was terribly harsh. And he got off very lightly. He got 4 months.
And he would have served that on Guernsey?
No.
He'd have been sent off. Yeah. I wonder if he ever came back or he just disappeared
he'd already been shipped off to France anyway.
Oh, that's true, yes. Yeah.
I imagine he would have probably ended up on the Eastern Front, or what was left of the Eastern Front.
Yeah, well, of course, the Eastern Front, and then, of course, there'd have soon been a Western Front.
Yeah, Eastern Front's moving a bit west by this point.
Right, we move on to something that we've covered off slightly. This is the Flower episode, when quite a prominent personality, it's described as Mr. Hill Cottingham, got mixed up in this so-called stealing flour, I suppose, in its crudest sense.
Well, that's what he was charged with. But just to backtrack a little bit, if you haven't listened to the December episode, we kind of trailed this. He got arrested in December 1943 because he was basically in charge of the flour supplies and various other supplies around the island, so essential foods. He was in charge of some aspects of that. He was found with a sack of flour sweepings from the floor of one of the stores. Let's face it would have been useless anyway, because God knows what would have been in it. He was supposedly found with that. It caused a massive stink because these things spread. He was a deputy as well, so he's the equivalent of an MP in Guernsey. It was like, Hill Cottingham is corrupt, that sort of thing. And he got absolutely slammed. He got a £200 fine.
Massive. That's thousands and thousands of pounds.
Yeah, I didn't work it out before the show, but that is a lot of money at the time. And I think it was because he was flour controller. He was found guilty of trying to obtain illegal supplies of flour. Now, we can see how trumped up this was, because we're not going to wait until post-war. He got a pardon from the king.
Yes. I mean, one of the things that was said is this is floor sweepings as well, wasn't it? Mm. And it was pointed out that some of the people that were in the vicinity, without putting a finer point on it, just sort of spat on the floor and it wasn't hygienic. And some of these people had TB. I mean, it's the floor sweepings are the last thing you really want.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, anyway, he got a pardon. It made national newspapers in the UK.
Well, when we get to the point where we're sort of looking back on the occupation, we'll have to try and follow up, see what happened to Mr. Hill Cottingham. With a name like that, we shouldn't have too much trouble tracking him down.
He was the only male Hill Cottingham that I could find in Guernsey,
exactly.
in Guernsey when I looked. So I think we're probably okay with that. I don't think we're going to have too much trouble. Not like LePage's, Lahira's, that sort of thing.
Now, you have found a photograph taken in July 1943 that has a good deal of mystery about it.
It does indeed. Well, we've talked a lot about the Red Cross Bureau here for sending messages, etc. And Melva Stacey, when I interviewed her, talked about her time working at the Red Cross Bureau. She doesn't appear in this photograph, though, because it's a different time. She'd moved on to working in the hospital by this point, I think. But it's rather curious. So this photograph appeared in the Channel Island Monthly Review of January 1944 in the UK. It's a posed photograph of the clerical staff, all being ladies, from the Red Cross Bureau in Guernsey, and it was taken in July 1943. I have several issues with this.
And it's a very formal pose.
It's a very formal pose.
In a photographic studio by the looks of it.
Or somewhere else, a very formal setting with really nice ornate furniture, etc. And they're clearly wearing their best clothes for this photograph, and it's just how did this happen? So I can't imagine the Germans would have taken it, because they were the only ones that could legitimately have cameras. Well, you were allowed indoor photography to a certain extent, but mostly cameras have been confiscated. So unless you had permission to have a camera.
The only thing that comes to mind, if I could just interject there, we're talking about rhetorical question, did the Germans take this photograph? But could it have been for propaganda reasons that we haven't been able to trace down where it is used, or where it was intended to be used but perhaps never was? So the Germans may have orchestrated it.
Yeah, I don't know. It didn't appear in the Guernsey press, as far as I can tell, or in the Star. The only other,
but I'm talking about out of the island.
Out of the island, potentially. Don't know.
Look how well looking our Red Cross people are in Guernsey, because as you say, it's nicely posed. They're very well dressed. And what I'm thinking is, as a possible solution, is the photograph was taken by the Germans, and whoever took it leaked a copy to somebody. And that's how it came to be in Guernsey hands, possibly.
Because July 43, all the people had been deported, all the deportations had happened.
Yep.
it's not going to have found its way there. It may have got sent, I guess, to somebody, like you say, if somebody had somehow got a copy of this, it might have been sent to one of the internment camps and then onwards to England, potentially.
Yeah, but we did have people that were coming back from the camps to help invalids come back to the Channel Islands. Then they had to return to the camps, and I'm just wondering if...
That's entirely possible. I guess the other thing is there were people from the Red Cross, because the Red Cross were operating with Switzerland as the protecting power.
They would have gone to the camps, possibly.
Yeah, but also coming here.
Yeah, yes.
To check up on the Germans.
So once it gets into the Red Cross lines of communication, I mean, we're speculating, but they did have it.
I will try and find out some more.
Yeah.
I just think it's quite an interesting photograph. I'll put the photograph on the website. So if you look at the show notes below this podcast episode, there'll be a link to some photographs. I'll try and pop up to the Torbo Valiant.
And needless to say, if anybody's got a view or some suggestions, or even may know some of the people in the photograph, we'd be very, very pleased to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, okay. Black market tale. So this here is one of these possibly apocryphal stories that one becomes aware of floating around during the occupation, that a chap, a fellow, unknown, unnamed, went down to the black market boat, whatever that was, with occupation marks and a couple of small sacks. Allegedly, he filled one up with butter and one with sugar that he had bought using this bounty. He was then stopped by a Feldgendarme, a German policeman, Nick, I guess, who asked him if he was black marketeering, and the chap cheerily replied, yes. And the German didn't believe him and simply walked on. That sounds a bit of a bravado to me.
Yeah.
It could have happened.
Yeah, reminds me actually of something, a wonderful chap called Colin Bell, who's very much still with us. I think, from memory, he's 104 by now, I think. Former Mosquito pilot. Very entertaining gentleman to chat to who lives in the UK. I went to a talk 4 or 5 years ago, We Have Ways Fest, and Colin said, better to glide on bullshit than slide on gravel. I think that
sums that up.
I think that's probably appropriate for this scenario. It's just like, well, what, I'm going to get nicked if I don't try something. So I might as well just go, yeah, I'm doing a bit of black market dealing.
Yeah, indomitable.
And the logic of the German film.
Yeah, of course.
Feldgendarme is probably either A, he's a lunatic, or B, he's not really doing that. He's winding me up because
I think if I was the policeman, I'd probably thought, yeah, okay, fine. But what's in the sack anyway? But hey ho.
Yeah, but we got to remember this. By this point, they're quite tired as well. So.
Yeah. Okay, teeth. There are only 3 dentists now on the island, and we're talking about Guernsey. The military authorities have decreed that they must take it in turns to attend foreign labourers. However, only extractions are to be treated, and no anaesthetics are to be applied. Blimey.
Well, anaesthetic was one of the things that you very rarely got by this point, even if you were having an operation in hospital. You basically there had to be a really, really good reason, because they just didn't know it.
Yeah, my mother, who was in London, was a Londoner, and she told me she had to have dental work done during the war in London, or rather, war period in London, without anaesthetic and not present.
No, it's bad enough with anaesthetic.
Okay, we're now being told that local newspapers were reduced to only 4 sheets. And I think, Nick, was there some sort of controversy about if they're only 4 sheets, why are we paying the same amount of money? And they're nearly all adverts anyway, and surely the local newspapers are making quite a bit of money out of this.
No, I don't think the papers were making quite a bit of money, because they had the problem of getting hold of newspaper. I mean, the Jersey Evening Post, that had we talked about it in a previous episode. I think it was like 2 weeks when they didn't print, because they had no paper to print on, no ink to print the papers with.
And I mean, who was advertising, like, shop-wise and business-wise? There was nothing to sell.
Well, no, Now, the pharmacy from the Stone Leaks, they are consistent with their advertising, but then I guess they can make they frequently advertise tonics to suit all sorts of ills. Now, I guess if you're doing that, you could probably experiment with various different things that you just find.
Sounds a bit snake oilish to me.
We're not casting aspersions on Stone Lakes.
No. Well, they're still in existence. In fact, my mother used to work for the family.
But they advertise. I mean, they're up front. They tell you what's in it, so you can make your own mind up as to whether it's going to do any good. But so they have adverts, but then the rest of it tends to be the bartering stuff. The cinemas announcing what's going on and the theatres.
And sport, I suppose. There was still a bit of sport going on. A lot of sport.
Yeah, that's reported in the papers. You don't really see it advertised, but they do. They carry out. There's football, baseball, various other. The tennis gets reported. The bowls, because we know that Ambrose Robin was keen on going up to play bowls. There's all sorts going on from that point of view.
Okay, we now hear from Louis Guillemette about requisitioned vehicles. The Field Kommandantur have ordered, which is the German authorities, have ordered 8 motorcycles, 4 cars, and 3 lorries to be handed over to the German authorities. Presumably, says the authorities, that's German or state authorities, presumably for German use.
Yeah, be for German use.
Yeah, and poor Louis loses his beloved motorcycle.
Yeah, which got him home from his Christmas party, even though he'd had a few drinkies, shall we say. Anybody who listened to the December 43 episode will know that he wrote in his diary about the motorcycle getting them home because
it knew its way on its own.
It knew its way on its own. So there we go. So his very clever motorcycle got taken away from him.
More, of course, inevitably food is on the minds, if not the stomachs, of Diarist Sword reports further cuts to rations. Potato ration to be cut by 50%. So something that had been cut and cut and cut was cut by half yet again. And we talked about flour. Flour disappeared completely.
Yeah. Just a complete nightmare for everybody.
Yeah. So this presumably means that there's no bread ration at all. Are we talking about flour that is being sold to civilians that they can do something with?
There was a bread ration, but it was cut. Everything was cut. It's cut after cut after cut, so it's compounding because, you start off with a loaf of bread at the start, that gets cut to half a loaf of bread, and then they halve the ration again, so you're ending up with very little. But the Germans at this point are quite worried. We talked about hardtack, the hardtack operation commando raid in Sark and the one in Jersey. They're absolutely on the edge of their nerves. What the hell's going on? Are we going to get some sort of attack on the Channel Islands to try and take them back? So they're very nervous, and that comes on to another thing that we've got here, where Ord's aware that von Schmettau, who's the commandant, has protested because on one hand, you've got High Command and Hitler on the continent demanding to take troops out of the island. Bearing in mind there are a ridiculous amount of troops here.
Yeah.
They're trying to take them out of the island, but von Schmettau's going, no, I need them. You can't take these Kriegsmarine personnel away from the island. I need them here to defend the island. Now, of course, we know that Hitler was obsessed with the islands, frequently referred to as Hitler's Island Madness. So eventually von Schmettau gets it rescinded.
But von Schmettau, when he first came here, he was a colonel, still with quite a bit of clout. He's actually a general now, and he was the nephew of von Rundstedt.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
So he was well connected. He was. Anyway.
It does sort of save him later on. There's a more to that story later on. You'll have to wait a few months for that one to play out. But he was basically trying to be also, apart from the fact he was trying to obey orders in terms of defending the islands, but he did his utmost to protect the civilian population from the harshest of the orders that were coming down from France.
A loyal German, but not necessarily a loyal Nazi.
Well, yeah, exactly, and that's became his downfall later on. Which
and it's something we will get to, but this whole notion, because I've been working on a little side project, this whole notion of German officers, small cadres of German officers that weren't pro-regime, particularly in the Channel Islands. Lots more work to be done on that, but an interesting subject. Now, Reverend Ord, of course, has a confidant, Reinhold Zachman, who obviously is a serving German officer, but had his own brushes with the German regime. He'd been imprisoned prior to the war. Reinhold tells Ord that there were many planes over France. There was a lot of air activity at this point in the war, wasn't there?
The build-up. And
Reinhold was stationed at Vale Mill, which we can see from my garden here. And this is a very tall building that is on a very high point in the lower part of the island. Enormous views out to sea and over the other islands. So he was in a position to see a lot of this air activity as it took place, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And this goes back to the US aircraft, the B-17 Flying Fortresses that we talked about in the December episode, because obviously he's talking to Ord on New Year's Day. These events have taken place previously. So, but yeah, he would have had a fantastic viewpoint from there to be able. I mean, you can see from probably about a quarter of a mile away from the Vale Mill, you're basically then on the beach facing France. Even from that beach, you can see the coast of France very clearly.
Yeah. Yep.
So if you're a couple of 100 feet up a windmill
with binoculars
and rangefinders as well,
right, exactly,
all that sort of gear, you're going to be able to see a lot. So he does fill Ord in on a lot of information about such things.
Now, we do have an issue to do with the B-17, which we're going to clear up. I think we need a bit more information on that.
We'll come back to that one.
But then other aircraft down. Could you talk us through that?
Yeah, so there's, on the 10th of January, sadly, Flight Lieutenant J.M. Crabb is killed. He was on mission to France, and he was killed during the occupation. He's commemorated on the Runnymede Memorial. Typhoons were quite active around the Channel Islands. Really, from this point onwards, we'll get to what happened in June 44, with a particularly significant event there. And actually, I might interview a few people about that in the run-up to that.
Can I just ask then, Nick, because we now know that we're only 6 months from D-Day. Would activity over the Channel Islands be D-Day orientated now? Instead of all the missions that have been flown before, all the aerial reconnaissance was just stuff that happened in the war. Would we now see more of a D-Day, or what turned out to be Overlord purpose about activities here on the islands?
Yeah, potentially, because they wanted to know what was going on here in terms of photo reconnaissance, which is why there's so much available in the way of photo reconnaissance. There's thousands and thousands of photographs of aerial reconnaissance, because they were trying to assess the impact of the fortifications here, because you've got to remember that, from certain bits of the Channel Islands, you could hit the French coast.
You could. And we're talking about batteries here, not aircraft. We're talking about batteries situated on an island could actually land shells on the French mainland.
Yeah.
Myris battery being one of them, for example.
Well, you just look at Alderney as well. Alderney could
8 miles away.
8 miles away, they could shell France as well. Jersey equally.
Yes, and of course, we now know where the D-Day landings were, but the Germans, if they had thought that the Allies would wash up on the French coast, they could have washed up potentially anywhere, as far in the German mind. And so the Channel Islands, although not near the eventual landings at this point in the war, would have still been strategic more than before, perhaps, for both the Germans and the Allies.
Yeah. Absolutely. Perhaps not strategic, but enough of a
to be significant. Well, not significant, perhaps, but you'd have to have the islands in mind, even if you weren't going to use them. Or what were the Germans going to do from there?
Or control the French coast coastline as well, make it not safe for shipping, etc., and also potentially get the islands back without a fight at an earlier stage than actually happened. So unfortunately, Flight Lieutenant Crabb was killed. He was a pilot with 193 Squadron, didn't complete his mission, and unfortunately we don't know any more than that.
A Typhoon.
It's a brilliant aircraft. I've got a bit.
I think you're a bit of a fan.
I am a bit of a fan of the Typhoon, and it was a pretty good aircraft. They had rockets on them at one point.
Yeah.
They tried all sorts of things, but no, brilliant aircraft. It could drop bombs as well. If you just looked at it, you'd probably think it was a fighter if you didn't know.
It was fast, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Hence the name, I suppose.
Then we've got some other losses that are reported around.
Yeah.
So this one was Wellington. So this one came from Upper Hayford. It left just after 7 o'clock in the evening on the 25th of January, heading for Gronville to drop leaflets. That sadly was lost with all 6 crew, and 2 of the bodies were washed ashore. We all talks about the burials, as does Ambrose Robin, about there being not much fuss, because we remember back to the Charybdis burials and Limborne burials, the Germans were caught off guard by the amount of people that turned up, so they don't allow much. Then there was a Lancaster.
Sorry, Nick, can I just go back to the Wellington, because the incident occurred on the 25th of January 1944. We're recording this on the 25th of January 2026.
We are indeed.
So 82 years.
I hadn't thought about it. But that one was off leaflet dropping over France, and a number of the diarists talk about finding leaflets written in French in Guernsey.
But how would they have got here then? Are they fluttering down from or jettisoned over the islands?
But just from, it could have just been dropped by another aircraft.
Yeah.
Could have been somehow dropped whilst this aircraft was coming down. We've got a Lancaster as well, which was shot down from 61 Squadron, which had left from Skellingthorpe. Tim Osborne, one of the tour guides, who I was talking to yesterday, he's got a great Facebook page. If you want to go and find out stuff to do with the occupation of the Channel Islands, go and have a look on Facebook at Tim's Guided Walks, because Tim's got some great stuff on there, and he's got a whole write-up about this Lancaster. It had gone on a mission to Berlin in Germany. It was hit by anti-aircraft fire on the way to the target just south of Hanover, badly damaged, ends up heading towards the northwest of Guernsey, which is a long way from Berlin, but no sophisticated navigation equipment, etc. In those days, they had to try and ditch the aircraft in the sea because they ended up down a couple of 100 feet, so they were too late about that. It was rough seas as well. All the diarists are talking about the fact the weather's particularly rubbish, and the four of them got into the dinghy, but the rest of them didn't, unfortunately.
So there were 4 survivors.
Yeah, 4 survivors.
But them
were killed.
But Sergeant William Beach's body was washed up at Point of a Bay, which is on the sort of getting on towards the northwest coast of Guernsey. And he was buried at the Fort George Cemetery, and he lays at rest there to this day.
I believe so.
Yeah. I was to check up on that. Fort George, of course, was or is a military cemetery. It's still regarded as a military cemetery. And if you're coming to Guernsey and want to pay respects to servicemen, it's a very, very beautiful place to visit on the cliffs just south of St. Peter Port.
Right, we've got a couple of other things that have come up as well, which we're running out of time, but we'll get to them. If you listen to the September 40, actually, it's funny that there's quite a few bits from the September 43 episode which have rocked up in January 1944. You'll remember that Louis Guillemette was talking about a quarry near Bordeaux, because everybody had been banned from going for a swim in the sea because of the escapes and the minefields and various other issues around that. He talked about a quarry near Bordeaux, which had effectively what we'd call now a zip wire put in across the quarry, which I found out from this article, turned out to be stolen from the Germans, the wire.
Yeah.
So the reason this appeared in the paper a couple of days ago, so if anybody's in the market for a quarry with a bit of land, it's full of water, but it's on the market for 1.15 million with Cranford's estate agents. You can go look it up. But it was been in the Hubert family for a long, long time, but they're looking to sell it now. But apparently all sorts of stuff got dumped according to Mr. Hubert. People didn't want to give up shotguns and stuff like that, and various other bits and pieces. But it was a very popular bathing place, albeit very dangerous to go bathing in quarries. We've talked about that. Don't do it, kids. We've talked about that before. It's not safe to do that.
Not at all.
For a multitude of reasons.
Yeah. The photograph that appeared in a local paper, that was this week, wasn't it, Nick?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
It's a really good photograph, isn't it? It looks like a lake.
It does. I mean, it's quite a big quarry.
Yeah. It's big in terms of depth, and then there's big in terms of area.
I'll stick a link. I'll stick a link to the article and to the estate agents. Then other things that have happened this week. Well, on Friday, Tony and Dave from For You, The War Is Over. Really, really good podcast, which I highly recommend. They had an episode which I knew was coming because they'd been in touch with me before Christmas. I met them at the Imperial War Museum when I did the Podcast Live Festival, albeit I've been listening to their podcast for quite some time. They're running an entire series on great escapers, and one of them was Roy Bruard Longley, a Guernseyman. I was just like, when they got in touch with me before Christmas, do you know anything about this bloke? I was like, hang on, I didn't know there was a Guernseyman that had taken part in the Great Escape. So I did a bit of digging for them, but unfortunately...
Of digging?
I suppose that's appropriate, isn't it? Did a bit of digging for them and found a pre-war photograph of him and some other information about him. But they had a chap on who knew an awful lot about Roy Longley, because he didn't come back to the island. He did. One of the people that did actually survive the Great Escape.
Did he actually?
Yeah, he was
left the cat. He actually escaped.
He was at the end of the tunnel. So we won't spoil it.
No,
I'll put a link. But if you go into your favorite podcast app and put For You, The War Is Over, you'll find all their stuff. They spend a huge amount of time researching these things, going to the archives in Kew and all sorts, and getting in touch with family members. Really, really good podcast, well worth a listen. So do check that one out. What else was on? I was going to mention something else. I can't remember what it was.
We were going to talk about Holocaust Memorial Day.
No, I've definitely not forgotten about that. I can't remember what the other thing was that I was going to talk about. Yes. So this episode will be out on Monday the 26th, but of course Tuesday the 27th of January is Holocaust Memorial Day, and there will be services across the Channel Islands for this, which we just wanted to remind people about, because we've touched on it previously, of course, that there were a number of people that were affected by this.
Of course. Okay, I think that's pretty much a wrap for today. We are reverting to once a fortnight now, I think, Nick.
Yes.
We had a burst of once a week and such like. Once a fortnight, of course, gives us the opportunity to insert specials from time to time. And I think that if listeners had particular queries or offers to make of information, we love hearing from you. And a number of people have got in touch with us. Absolutely great material from people. And it's not just about sending us stuff, it's about asking us questions. I'm sure between myself and Nick, if we don't know, we're sure we know people that would have a view on it. So please get in touch with us at occupied@gnetradio.com. Have you remembered?
I've remembered. I've remembered what else I was going to talk about.
The floor is yours.
So a friend of mine, Simon Hurd, who lives in the UK, went to hear a Guernseyman speak about the occupation. A chap called James Porter, who I believe speaks fairly often. He's ex-forces, lives in the UK these days. But I've got his email address, so Simon very kindly obtained his email address for me. And he also pointed him in our direction in terms of listening to the podcast as well. So if you are listening, James, I'll be in touch. I thought it'd be a great person to have on. Simon said it was a really, really good lecture that he went to. So thanks very much for that, Simon. Much appreciated. I've also got somebody else that wants to be interviewed about their family, so I need to get onto that one as well. Which it came via my mother. Actually, it's somebody that she knows. So yeah, it's all going on.
It is all going on.
And our episode with Dave Hewitt, if you haven't caught it, I spoke to Dave Hewitt a few episodes ago about his interest in the occupation. He lives in the UK, but comes here reasonably often. That's been a really popular episode, and I know when we saw one of the other tour guides the other week up at the airport, he said, you need to. Dave Bartram said, you need to get that guy back on. He's a walking, talking advert for Guernsey tourism.
Yeah,
and he is. He really is. And everyone, all the feedback's been really, really positive, and I've passed it on to Dave Hewitt. So, Dave, thanks very much.
Yeah, and if you're thinking about coming to Guernsey for holidays at any point, then, you have an interest in the occupation, then I'm sure that Nick and I can find time, not necessarily together, but to meet up and chat. It's always nice to meet our listeners.
Absolutely. Or even go on one of our tours. Shameless plug there. I'm writing a few new ones at the moment.
Yeah. Yes, Nick, will you qualify this year?
Yes.
Yeah, and I am qualified, so we can also arrange tours for you. And we know some absolutely fantastic tour guides that like Tim Osborne, that's major, I think the Americans say, on the occupation of the Channel Islands. I think we're done.
Yeah, I think we better shut up now. I can talk for hours.
Okay, thank you once again for listening. In a couple of weeks' time, February 1944. So it's goodbye from Keith.
Cheery.
Bye from Nick.
He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb. And they're gonna wanna drop them on someone. It's 5 to 7. All his friends and family had gone. Left on a ship 'cause they knew